On a cool evening in mid-1942, a young actress stepped onto a Hollywood set with the kind of poise that made people pause. The makeup department fussed over her hair, while a production assistant hurried around, adjusting lights to capture the perfect angle. Newspapers and magazines had already begun calling her the next Katharine Hepburn, and some predicted she would rival her famous father's legacy. That young star was Diana Barrymore. Her name alone carried weight, enough to intrigue a public eager for new faces, but also enough to foreshadow a story heavy with expectation and tragedy. She looked radiant on camera, a flash of excitement in her eyes whenever the director called action. But beneath that radiant surface was a life shaped by heartbreak, overshadowed by a father she scarcely knew, and haunted by the unstoppable momentum of a legendary family legacy. Today, we're going to journey through Diana Barrymore's life, from her promising first steps in the film world to her quiet last days in a modest apartment. If you've never heard of Diana, or if you only vaguely remember her name, prepare to be moved by a life story that illustrates how relentless and punishing Hollywood can be, even for someone born with all the advantages of a famous last name. Diana came into this world on March 3, 1921, as the daughter of the acclaimed actor John Barrymore. He was dubbed the Great Profile, revered on the stage and in silent pictures before conquering talkies with his rich, sonorous voice. John's own siblings, Lionel and Ethel Barrymore, stood among Hollywood's greatest. It was not just a lineage, it was an empire of theatrical tradition dating back to the 19th century. You might say Diana was destined for stardom before she could even utter her first word. But as often happens in storied families, the glamorous facade hid turmoil behind closed doors. Diana's mother, the poet Blanche Ulrichs, known by her pen name Michael Strange, was fierce and independent, with a strong personality that did not mesh well with John's habits or schedule. The couple clashed, and in time, they divorced, leaving a young Diana with a complicated childhood. She hardly saw her father, who was preoccupied with his own career, social circles, and later, his own demons. Instead, Diana was raised mostly under her mother's roof, subject to an environment that some described as stifling. Blanche was brilliant and creative, but she could also be strict and demanding, pushing Diana to cultivate talents and manners befitting a Barrymore heir. And that name, Barrymore, was both a blessing and a curse. Wherever Diana went, she heard the same refrain: "You must be as gifted as your father. Surely you'll take Hollywood by storm. Your destiny is to carry on the legacy." Yet the more she heard it, the more it seemed to weigh on her. She missed the warmth of a family unit, rarely seeing John or forming that emotional bond a daughter naturally craves with her father. It wasn't that he didn't love her, but he lived in a different orbit, a perpetual swirl of film sets, stage tours, and bohemian parties. At school, Diana tried to fit in, but teachers noted her rebellious streak. She sought attention, sometimes negatively. Stories emerged about her talking back, breaking rules, or skipping class. It was as though she were acting out the frustration and confusion she felt at home. By her teens, she had been expelled from more than one institution, and her mother had all but run out of patience. The father figure she might have turned to was mostly absent. Even when she was taken to see him in his final years, the encounters felt awkward. John's health was deteriorating due to alcoholism and other issues. Diana sensed that something was slipping away, not just from him, but from the entire possibility of having a genuine relationship with him. In 1942, John Barrymore died, leaving behind a complex legacy and an even more complicated emotional landscape for Diana. She was, at that point, just entering adulthood, and the world regarded her as the rightful next star in the Barrymore lineage. Producers had heard about her acting potential. She had inherited her father's striking eyes and strong profile, which looked stunning under stage lights. Universal Studios, always eager to find fresh faces with that special sparkle, signed her. Magazines like Life and Photoplay showcased Diana in glamorous photo spreads, proclaiming her as the actress to watch. One writer even penned a reincarnation of the Barrymore flame, this time in a young woman's body. It was a grand statement, loaded with hope for an audience that adored any new chapter in the Barrymore saga. That same year, Diana found herself on set for Eagle Squadron, an action drama about American volunteer pilots in the Royal Air Force. She had only a supporting part, but critics zeroed in on her presence. They noted a certain magnetic quality, maybe not fully trained, but undeniably engaging. Before long, she took on roles in Nightmare, also released in 1942, and then Ladies Courageous in 1944. These were not epic blockbusters, but they allowed her to show a range that suggested promise. She had a crisp delivery that could be both vulnerable and strong, a certain emotional honesty that came across on screen. Industry buzz painted her as the next Katharine Hepburn, possibly because of her patrician bearing and what some described as a regal intelligence. But the truth was, Diana had never had a thorough acting education. She was leaning heavily on whatever natural gift she had inherited, plus the bits of wisdom gleaned from watching her father, aunt, and uncle. She was raw, still forming a personal identity, and was suddenly asked to carry the weight of an entire dynasty's reputation. It didn't help that fans and critics alike expected her to match or surpass her father, a man widely regarded as one of the most influential performers of his generation. How could a young woman just starting out replicate decades of stage and film mastery overnight? She tried her best. She carried herself with confidence at red carpet events and wore the Barrymore name with a mixture of pride and anxiousness. But behind the scenes, Diana was struggling. She had been introduced to alcohol at a young age, one of those hush-hush realities in a socialite family that counted cocktails as part of daily life. The circle of acquaintances she found herself in wasn't always supportive. The intense pressure to be the perfect Barrymore started to manifest in destructive ways, fueling her inclination to binge drink. Some nights she'd show up on set groggy and disoriented. Other days, she would arrive bright-eyed and determined to prove herself. The inconsistency worried producers and directors, and they began to doubt whether she could handle the rigors of a major film career. By the mid-1940s, the cracks had started to show more publicly. Diana had a string of short-term relationships, some with fellow actors, others with men who offered the excitement she sought. Her impulsive nature pushed her from one chaotic situation to another. Friends described her as intensely charismatic at times and utterly self-destructive at others, echoing aspects of her father's famously tumultuous life. More than once she found herself in the tabloids, not for triumphant box office news, but for rumored affairs, nights of partying, or rumored arguments on set. While these events might have been tolerated if she were delivering blockbuster hits, her film appearances hadn't earned that lofty status. After Ladies Courageous in 1944, her momentum stalled. By then, it was obvious that she needed more than a publicity push or a carefully staged magazine interview to regain her footing. She needed genuine emotional support, therapy, perhaps time away to develop her craft. But the Hollywood machine in that era was less forgiving. She was under contract, she was expected to perform, and any sign of personal crisis was frequently hidden or minimized to protect studio interests. During the late 1940s, Diana tried pivoting to the stage, hoping that perhaps the live arena, where her father had once excelled, would allow her to hone her talent with the immediacy of an audience. She performed in a few theatrical runs, but her discipline was inconsistent. She'd show flashes of brilliance followed by erratic mood swings and absences. Directors grew wary of casting her, no matter how big her name was. Gossip pages revealed rumored backstage meltdowns, missed rehearsals, and nights spent in seedy bars, accompanied by men who seemed more interested in the Barrymore mystique than in Diana's well-being. Somewhere along the line, the heartbreak of never fully reconciling with her father's memory caught up with her. She once stated in an interview, "I'm always asked, what is it like to be the daughter of John Barrymore? But I was never really his daughter. I never had the chance." Her voice cracked when she said it, and you could see the pain that had been fueling her spiral. In the 1950s, film roles evaporated. She was no longer the fresh ingenue that studios wanted to promote. Younger talent was emerging, plus an entire wave of new acting methods and styles. Diana was overshadowed by the memory of her father and by her own reputation, which had morphed from promising star to unreliable. She tried everything she could to stay in show business: smaller theaters, variety programs, occasional interviews about the golden age of Hollywood, essentially living off the aura of the Barrymore name. But these opportunities didn't pay well, nor did they offer the creative or emotional satisfaction she craved. Marriages came and went, each one seemingly undone by some combination of addiction, emotional volatility, and mutual incompatibility. She was wed 3 times, but details about these unions rarely read like fairy tales. Tensions often escalated to the point of arguments and, at times, physical altercations. Divorce records showed claims of emotional and physical abuse, and each relationship ended with a bitter sense of defeat. When the marriages failed, her drinking escalated further. When her drinking escalated, the marriages that followed had even less chance of success. It was a vicious cycle. Meanwhile, the press hardly showed sympathy. Diana Barrymore stumbles again, or John Barrymore's daughter in drunken spree. These were the sorts of stories that overshadowed any mention of her actual talent. By the mid-1950s, Diana was drifting. She'd stay in cheap motels or with acquaintances, sometimes with no real plan for the next week. Now in her 30s, she was a far cry from the starry-eyed woman who had once graced magazine covers. The beloved Barrymore flame had dimmed, and many in Hollywood had forgotten her, turning their attention to rising stars like Marilyn Monroe, Audrey Hepburn, and Grace Kelly. In 1957, in a moment of clarity, or perhaps desperation, she decided to write her memoir, titled Too Much Too Soon. It was both a confessional and a cautionary tale. She laid out her life story: the tumultuous childhood, the overwhelming parental legacy, the quick rise to minor stardom, the subsequent slide into drinking, and the chain of heartbreaks that followed. Some passages were painfully raw. She spoke of the loneliness she felt when newspapers branded her a failure, the sense of unworthiness that haunted her every time she attempted to form a loving bond. The title itself carried a tragic resonance. She had been handed fame and fortune on a silver platter before she was emotionally ready to handle it, and it chewed her up. The memoir caused a stir. Some critics dismissed it as another self-pitying Hollywood sob story. Others found it courageous and enlightening, an eye-opening look into what it means to grow up with a revered yet tragically flawed parent. A few older fans who remembered her father from the stage and silent films read it with a kind of mournful understanding. They recognized patterns of addiction and heartbreak that echoed John Barrymore's own trajectory. In 1958, the book was adapted into a film of the same name, starring Dorothy Malone as Diana. The movie tried to capture the heartbreak of a star child overshadowed by her father's legend. It stirred mild controversy, partly because it was one of the earliest major motion pictures to show the darker sides of a Hollywood legacy, laying bare the kind of emotional damage that can result from a family's public dissection. But by then, Diana's direct involvement was minimal. Her life was unraveling more quickly than any film script could capture. She attempted a brief comeback in the late 1950s, showing up for interviews on small local TV stations, sometimes hosting or performing at variety shows that exploited her last name. Producers would invite her to talk about the golden age of Hollywood. But inevitably, the conversation turned to her personal troubles or lurid questions about her father's final days. The pain was obvious on her face. She needed help, not more exploitation. But the help never really arrived. Her health took a nosedive. Years of steady alcohol abuse combined with tranquilizers and other drugs had weakened her heart. She found herself hospitalized off and on, battling shakes, anxiety, and the damage to her liver. She had also run out of funds. The lifestyle that once let her move in glamorous circles had depleted whatever inheritance she may have had. Many of her father's old Hollywood friends had either passed away or distanced themselves. She tried to reach out to family members, but they could only do so much. The Barrymore name, by the end of the 1950s, was kept alive by Lionel and Ethel's continued stature, and eventually through the promise of younger relations like John Drew Barrymore, and, in a later generation, Drew Barrymore herself. Diana, however, was losing her battle against personal demons. On January 25, 1960, she was found dead in her rented apartment in New York. Official reports list heart failure as the primary cause, brought on by an extended period of heavy drinking and medication abuse. She was just 38 years old, alone, and without the comfort of close family or friends by her side. Media coverage was far from the sensational mania you might expect. Indeed, some newspapers barely covered it at all. A few ran short articles noting her passing, referencing her father, and the unfulfilled potential that had once made for big headlines. In a sorrowful twist, the hush surrounding her death was a stark contrast to the fanfare that had surrounded her birth, promising the next big Barrymore star. After she was gone, the lingering question remained, what could have been done differently? Some have argued she was never given a chance to form her own identity. Others believe that her father's absence and her mother's demands left her emotionally wounded from the start. And still others point to a Hollywood system that prized youth and glamour above all else, discarding individuals the moment they became too complicated or tarnished for easy marketing. The truth, perhaps, involves all of these factors. In terms of legacy, Diana Barrymore's filmography isn't very long. Titles like Eagle Squadron, Nightmare, and Ladies Courageous are not widely watched today, though they sometimes appear on classic movie channels or streaming services aimed at nostalgic cinephiles. Yet her story still resonates as a cautionary tale, one that has been referenced by countless YouTube channels and documentaries dedicated to Hollywood's darker chapters. You might find her name popping up under Tragic Star Children or Broken Legacies, with hosts dissecting how the combination of an iconic last name and personal vulnerabilities can lead to a heartbreaking downfall. Beyond the bullet points of her biography, though, Diana's life underscores the human toll of being thrust into an unforgiving spotlight without the emotional support or self-awareness to navigate the pitfalls. She wrote in her memoir, "I am John Barrymore's daughter, but I have never truly been myself." Those words echo through the decades as a poignant reminder that great lineage can be both a gift and a curse. The memoir, Too Much Too Soon, was, in her own words, a desperate attempt to explain how and why her life spiraled. It offered no neat resolution, no comforting moral. It simply said, "This is what happened when I was handed everything before I knew how to handle anything." While older Western fans of classic Hollywood have kept her memory alive, the general public rarely revisits Diana's story, at least not in the same way they do more famous Barrymores or other Golden Age stars. But for those who do stumble upon her tale, it's hard not to feel empathy. You see pictures of her as a teenage girl, radiant and hopeful, and you realize how harshly she was thrust into adult responsibilities and adult temptations without a strong safety net. You read stories of her father's brilliance on stage, only to realize she never really got to spend time learning from him. He was lost to her as a mentor and parent. There's a small anecdote shared by an acquaintance who attended one of Diana's final variety shows. It was a small venue, nothing like the grand theaters that once booked the Barrymore name. During intermission, Diana apparently lingered backstage, taking slow sips from a bottle hidden in her dressing room. A stagehand who felt sorry for her offered a gentle word, something along the lines of, "Miss Barrymore, if you ever need to talk, I'm here." She was visibly shaken, but she mustered a wavering smile and said, "Nobody can save me from myself." Then she walked back on stage to finish her set with a forced bravado. That moment, the stagehand recalled, captured the heartbreak of a woman who recognized the depth of her own destructive cycle, but felt powerless to stop it. In the years following her death, some relatives and friends expressed regret that they hadn't done more to intervene. A few quietly told reporters or biographers that the entire Barrymore clan had a history of tragedy tied to alcohol, romantic drama, and the burdens of public life. They spoke of Ethel Barrymore's sorrow at losing her niece so young. They spoke of Lionel Barrymore's advanced age and ill health at that time, making him less able to be a guiding presence. The fan community, especially older viewers who remembered the Barrymores, shared thoughtful reflections in letters to movie magazines. One wrote, "It's a shame that Diana couldn't break free. She had the spark of the Barrymores, just not the scaffolding to keep her upright when storms came." The sense of mourning was genuine, but overshadowed by the unstoppable forward motion of Hollywood's ever-changing roster of stars. During the 1960s and 1970s, whenever the story of the Barrymore family was revisited, be it on television documentaries or in printed retrospectives, Diana's story typically formed a footnote. And then there was Diana, the tragic daughter. Yet in these fleeting mentions, the full truth of her struggle was rarely explored with nuance. Only in later years, as the culture began to speak more openly about addiction and mental health, did the complexity of her situation gain wider understanding. People came to see that Diana Barrymore wasn't just a spoiled star child who threw away her fortune. She was a person shaped by grief, unrealistic expectations, and generational patterns of substance abuse. When fans of the Barrymore lineage discuss her today, there's a sadness that lingers. It's tempered by a sense of perspective. We've seen other star children falter under less pressure, so it becomes clearer how Diana's downfall was almost inevitable given the era in which she lived. Someone might comment on a classic film forum, "She had everything and nothing at the same time," and that single sentence can capture the paradox at the heart of her life. If we step back from the sorrow for a moment, we can also see a glimmer of the genuine talent she possessed. If you watch Eagle Squadron, you'll notice a certain sincerity in her performance. There's a scene where her character confronts the dangers of war, and you can read a real sense of fear and desperation in her eyes. That vulnerability, you realize, came not only from her acting, but from the emotional well inside her, the longing for a father's approval she never fully received, the confusion about who she was supposed to be. It's a haunting quality that gives her work a depth you might not expect from someone so young, or from films that weren't exactly marquee blockbusters. For older Western audiences who lived through the era, or whose parents did, mentioning the Barrymores usually brings to mind the regal artistry of the stage or iconic Golden Age films. Then, in a quieter tone, the conversation might shift to the tragedies that plagued the family. Diana's name appears gently, like a sigh, reminding us of how fleeting and fragile that stardom can be. Some fans have posted online tributes, recalling the times they saw her on screen or read about her in magazines. Others recount seeing her in one of those variety shows or interviews late in her life, describing how behind the bright lights you could sense a sorrow that words couldn't fully convey. There's one particularly touching personal story from a woman who claimed to have met Diana in a ladies' room at a small theater in the mid-1950s. According to her account, Diana seemed shaky and nervous, standing by the sink with trembling hands. The woman recognized her instantly. There was no mistaking that Barrymore face. Summoning courage, the woman approached her, offered a kind word about how her father had been her mother's favorite actor, and how she believed Diana had inherited a great gift. Diana stared at her reflection in the mirror, tears welling up, and simply said, "I wish I believed that myself." Then she dabbed her eyes, offered a polite nod, and walked out. That one brief encounter, the woman wrote decades later, stayed with her for the rest of her life as a reminder of how lost people can be behind the facade of celebrity. Perhaps the best way to remember Diana is to hold both the tragedy and the glimmers of hope in mind. She was, after all, someone with a genuine spark of talent, a quick wit, and a longing heart that never found peace. In revisiting her films or leafing through vintage magazine spreads, you can't help but see a spark in her eyes, a flicker that suggests what she might have become had circumstances been kinder. If you've stayed with me through this journey, thank you for taking the time to remember Diana Barrymore. Her story might not be as familiar or widely told as those of other fallen stars, but it's a poignant piece of Hollywood history that still resonates today. It reminds us that behind every famous last name is a person with fears, hopes, and a fragile sense of self. And maybe it encourages us in our own lives to consider how we handle the expectations placed upon us, whether by family, society, or even ourselves. Thank you for watching, listening, and remembering Diana Barrymore with me. Her story is a chapter in the wider saga of a legendary family, but it's also a reminder of the universal human struggle to find worth and identity in a world that often measures us by impossible standards. May her journey spark compassion in our hearts and a deeper understanding of the complexities hidden beneath the glossy veneer of fame. And may it serve as a cautionary yet tender lesson that sometimes the brightest names need the most gentle care. Let's keep the conversation going, and until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.